Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the final session of the 8th Annual Repatriation Conference. You can tell I am auditioning to be MC at a powwow one day. That is my dream. Unfortunately, I don't have a good enough sense of humor or enough jokes to really be successful there, so you have to deal with me as the CEO of the Association on American Indian Affairs. I'm really excited about this very final panel. And let me tell you why we put this at the end of the day on the last day. This panel, it's called A View from the Top. Institutions share how they're making a difference. And we created this panel and we invited museum directors, so the decision makers, to invite them to tell us their stories of struggle in complying with NAGPRA and how they have changed the direction of their institutions to support repatriation and relationship building with Native nations. Let me read the abstract of how we wrote it, and then let me interpret it. Institutions share how they freed themselves of obstacles that prevented their efforts with Native nations to repatriate culturally affiliated ancestors and burial belongings, sacred items, and objects of cultural patrimony. How has repatriation improved the institution's missions to better serve and educate the public? Ask questions and learn more about the positive and healing work being done by institution partners. So when I say institutions share how they freed themselves of obstacles, guess what I mean by that? They freed themselves of their own crap. And that's what we want to hear. We want to hear how those institutions faced their own crap, their own racism, to not repatriate, to not culturally affiliate, and change direction. And what I've asked each one of these institutions to give us was not rhetoric. We wanted to hear proof of how they have changed the direction that they're headed. And we have invited an illustrious cast of museum folks here today. In person, we have Mr. Ben Secunda. He's the NAGPRA project specialist at the University of Michigan. And we also have Heather Miller, who's Wyandotte, and the Director of Historic Preservation and Tribal Relations at the Illinois State Museum. On Zoom, are they up in Zoom? Can we bring them up? We have Sabrina Agarwal, who's a professor of anthropology and special advisor to the Chancellor at the University of California, Berkeley. And we also have, coming to us from Zoom, we have Steve Murray, who's the director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History, who just recently published a notice returning more than 10,000 ancestors. We also have Jane Pickering, who is the William and Muriel Seabury Howells director of the Harvard Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. Also with her is Judith Stoddart, who's the Associate Provost for University Arts and Collections at Michigan State University. And finally, but definitely not last on my list, in fact, he has been a wonderful advocate, Mr. Ryan Wheeler, Dr. Ryan Wheeler, the director of the Robert S. Peabody Institute of Archaeology at Phillips Academy. Let me welcome you to this wonderful panel. Give them a round of applause, get them warmed up. What I asked each one of them to do was that they had 10 minutes. There's 7 of them. They each have 10 minutes to tell us how amazing their museum has done in the last 30 years. We're gonna go alphabetically. Did I tell y'all I'd go alphabetically by first name or alphabetically by last name? Sabrina's up there, so I'll go with her. Let's start with Sabrina. Last. Thank you, Sabrina. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm happy to be here today and to be able to sit with the other panelists and hear about some of the changes that they've also made at their institution. We can go to the next slide. Great, thank you. I won't belabor the past and talk too much. I know we really want to shift to thinking of the future, but just to orient everyone with what's going on the UC Berkeley campus in particular. As most of you know, UC Berkeley is one of the oldest and largest anthropology museums in the US. I would like to acknowledge that the museum and the campus of UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Hutun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Ohlone people. As many of you know, we have a very large collection of ethnographic and archaeological holdings of film, recordings, photographs, baskets, but of course, sacred belongings and human remains and ancestors. We have holdings from across the US, but the largest is from California tribes, and the majority from particularly the San Francisco Bay Area. This, of course, is a long history, as Shannon mentioned, of structural and institutional racism, and ancestors and belongings were taken in violation of Indigenous community spiritual and cultural beliefs without prior and informed consent. I'm not sure if everyone can see the slides. Wendy just put up that she's not able to see the slides. I could see the slides.
The slides are up. We all can see them. Is Zoom okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Next slide. And I'm sorry, this map is a little washed out, but it's a map of the US. Just to give a sense of where our holdings are from, you can see that most of our holdings are, we do have holdings from across the country, but the majority on the West Coast, and I'll talk about that in a moment. UC Berkeley at its peak held approximately 12,000 ancestors. As of today, we are approximately at 9,000 ancestors. I have not put the numbers on this map. This is a map that we will have interactive on our a new website in the next coming weeks, but to give you a sense of where things are, we also have approximately 13,000 associated and unassociated cultural or sacred belongings from what we would think of as typically funerary objects or contexts. We have also approximately 200,000 belongings that we feel are NAGPRA eligible archaeological holdings that aren't typically categorized as funerary objects, but also eligible under NAGPRA that our campus is seeking to repatriate. As all of us know, historically, despite the passage of NAGPRA, UC Berkeley campus has made very little repatriation with both CalNAGPRA or now under NAGPRA. Next slide. Let's go ahead. I'm sorry, I think this might be one that you have to keep pressing all the buttons, and you can just press them all and I'll have them up. That's fine. I want to talk a little bit about some of the former obstacles that we had to repatriation in light of what I'll kind of mention are our big significant changes. Of course, the largest one is that historically for decades, the campus had a very historical reading of NAGPRA law, particularly consulting only with federally recognized tribes, and most of the Bay Area is federally unrecognized tribes. Scientific and scholarly evidence was privileged over tribal knowledge or discounted or given no weight in trying to determine cultural affiliation. The majority of the holdings were categorized as culturally unaffiliated or CUIs. We know none of these are culturally unaffiliated. They belong to communities in and around the state and particularly in the Bay Area. But it was used as a categorization tool to delay and obscure repatriation. Tribal representatives, even when they did make a claim, were not invited to participate with committee discussions on claim reviews. There was no time limit set previously on how long the university would wait for tribes to object. So a tribe would make a claim and they could wait and hold up a claim for a very long time. Tribes were asked repeatedly to submit more and more supporting evidence. The process wasn't clear or transparent. And again, these are just kind of really tactics to delay repatriation that happened for decades on the history of our campus. Perhaps the most painful and just upsetting thing that continued was research and teaching up until 2018 with particularly culturally unidentified ancestors and remains. Next slide. And this is a similar map that I showed you earlier, but just kind of now focusing specifically on the state of California. The smaller inset at the bottom there on the left is particularly the Bay Area. The little kind of spike coming up is what we think of as San Francisco. And of all of these approximately 9,000 ancestors that we have today, the majority are from two counties at the moment, Contra Costa and Alameda County in the Bay Area. We did have large holdings from Marin County, which, as I will mention, we have repatriated or in the process of transferring physical possession of. But you can see that the majority of our holdings are from the Bay Area. And most of these tribes are federally unrecognized. Next slide. We, as a campus and an institution, owe a huge debt to the Native people of the state of California and the Native American leadership on our campus, despite decades of obstructing repatriation and really scientific racist practices. Despite this, Native people continue to try to uplift and bring forth the things that were happening on our campus. In 2017, our Native American leadership on campus organized a tribal council. And this was really kind of the first seed of significant change. So while activism and people had been speaking about things for a long time, really this started a seed of change where at this tribal council, the Native American community within and outside the campus expressed frustration at the obstruction of repatriation. And this really led in 2018 to a change on campus. The museum was no longer involved with reviewing and handling claims. A creation of a new review committee was created with the majority of Native American membership with a clear mandate for repatriation. Following the heels of this, in 2018, the state legislature passed a Cal-NAGPRA assembly bill, which required state institutions to expedite repatriation to make clear all of the holdings that they had. And there was a subsequent assembly bill, a second one that was aimed specifically at UC Berkeley and calling out UC Berkeley campus. In response, the UC system drafted a new policy, which I think I can emphasize as one of the major changes in our campus, which took away some of our obstacles. The new policy really aligned, of course, with Cal-NAGPRA, and the emphasis is really on tribal consultation and in part of that process, and to be a tribally led process, repatriation in the state and particularly within the UC system. The other significant change that happened in response to this tribal council that we had was a moratorium on all of the research and teaching that had been happening with Native American ancestral remains and belongings, all belongings. There is no research or teaching unless it is a tribal request. Next slide. So some of the big changes that have happened, and I think I can't emphasize enough how much the system-wide policy really has changed our policy and practice across the UC system, but especially on our campus. The system-wide policy is in accordance to the state legislation, which really makes NAGPRA in our state a tribally led process and really shifting that focus to it being that way. The oversight of repatriation across the institutions in the state is with the Native American Heritage Commission, the NHC. In accordance with the guidelines for the legislation, the campuses, including the UC Berkeley campus, following this new system-wide policy in 2021, has a new implementation committee. This is the committee that will look at review claims, but also make sure that the campus is in compliance with both NAGPRA and Cal-NAGPRA and gives input on the policy and the process going forward. We had already reformulated the committee at that time in 2018, as I mentioned, but this actually is a committee that's now appointed by the NHC. It's a committee that I sit on, that I chair, and we all will take turns in chairing this committee. What's important is that it's a committee that's made up of 3 university representatives, and on our campus, 2 of them are Native American, as well as an equal number of 3 California tribal members. And all of the members, of course, volunteer to serve on this committee. So it's, again, really trying to have the oversight with the tribes of California. We also, in 2020, hired a NAGPRA liaison, a dedicated person who would be able to communicate and consult with tribes, and a campus repatriation coordinator on each campus. At the moment, ours is interim. We have a hire that's underway for our permanent campus repatriation coordinator. And this is the person, again, whose responsibility is to really be the one to help tribes come forward and make their claims and to know our holdings and work with the tribes. And on our campus, I would say the biggest change for us is that tribal knowledge is really privileged above everything else. And we speak with tribes of how they'd like to go forward with the claim that they make. We don't want it to be lengthy. We don't ask for a huge stack of papers. If a tribe is to tell us something is an object of cultural patrimony, that's enough. We don't need to have the details or any kind of tribal knowledge needs to be given to make evidence for a claim. Our perspective is that tribes are the ones that who know what the sacred objects are for. We trust their knowledge. We don't need to have a long set of lengthy discussion about it or information handed in. The other significant thing about the policy that I think is important to point out that makes things quite unique for our campus is that our campus has waived the need for the right of possession under NAGPRA, that tribes have to find evidence for sacred objects, for example, objects of cultural patrimony having the right of possession. We waive that. We no longer have that as part of the requirement. Next slide. So some of the progress that we have made since 2020 of July, we have repatriated and transferred approximately 1,000 ancestors. There are about, with that, 53,000 belongings that are either associated or unassociated from funerary contexts, about 1,600 or 1,700 objects of cultural patrimony, and some of these are archaeological and some of these are not. We have created our summaries and inventories. So these are records and inventories of all of the ethnographic or archaeological holdings. This is what's required under the legislation. These are given to the NHC, but also to all California tribes. And so this is really a shift to be transparent about what we have, which was an obstacle before. This was not really transparent. Things being categorized as CUI or culturally unaffiliated, which is no longer the case. We're trying to shift and remove those categorizations because we know that the ancestral lands where these sacred objects and ancestors are from. We are in consultation on the Berkeley campus with the tribes that are affiliated with the majority, or about 76% of all of our holdings. And so this is the direction of the future that we're hoping to continue. We have, of course, have only scratched the surface. We are just starting. We have a significant number of ancestors. The majority is still return. But this is the direction that we're hoping to head and continue with. Next slide. So just some examples, two of the things I really think are significant with the changes that we've made in the past year and a half or 18 months is really expanding our consideration of what we think of as objects of cultural patrimony. Two kind of examples. Recently, this past year, we made a large repatriation to the Delaware tribe, which included ancestors and sacred objects, but also included the repatriation of objects of cultural patrimony, including things like beans and seeds that we repatriated with them. Another example is the return of an ancestral basket to the Rincon tribe. And this is a photograph of the tribal council that came to our campus earlier in 2022, along with Chairman Bo Mazzetti holding the ancestral dragonfly basket. And this was a basket that the tribe for decades had come to visit, to teach us about, and come to open exhibits with the basket there, and they would come regularly to visit the basket and have traditional care with the basket, but they never thought they could take it home. And under this new policy, we were able to tell them the last time they came, we should try to, you should ask to repatriate this. And they were very surprised, and we were very pleased to be able to very quickly be able to have them take this basket home to their ancestral homeland. The other type of thing we're really trying to shift is to trying to understand how we can best quickly make large repatriations. We, of course, have a large set of ancestors and holdings to go home. We recently completed our first significant repatriation under this new policy to the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, federally recognized tribe from Marin County, where we returned 553 ancestors in process of having those last ancestors home, over 5,000 belongings, both associated and unassociated, and over 1,600 archaeological objects, which are objects of cultural patrimony. So we were very grateful to be able to have them work with us and help us get feedback and learn what would be the quickest way to be able to identify, but also be able to take ancestors and belongings home. Next slide. And this is my last slide. Our goal is to repatriate all of the ancestors and belongings that are in the Hearst Museum at the Berkeley campus. But we are cognizant that the time frame and the steps of how that will happen need to occur in consultation with tribes. Excuse me. We have a large holding of ancestors and belongings from the Bay Area, from the Ohlone people. And in many cases, we are going to have to work as a campus and an institution to find land for reinterment. And so one of the things we're realizing is that transfer of control might happen first, and that there will be a period of time in which we might have to continue to find the best ways to work with tribes on traditional care and how to implement how they would like to take care of and have ancestors and belongings kept until they're able to take them home, and we're able to help them do that. We have significant funding which is being dedicated by the UC system and also by our campus and our chancellor, but we will need a continual strong set of funding to complement the staff that we need to be able to invite tribes to campus, physically transfer these large holdings of ancestral remains and belongings, and also continue to build strong relationships with tribes. For some of these other things we know that we need to start looking for towards, like traditional care and loans and how tribes would like to go forward. For our campus, repatriation is very important. In serving our campus, we are a state institution. Our job is to be a institution that serves the people of California. And this, of course, includes Native people, and we need to be a place that is welcoming and healing for them. And we know we can't go forward with that until repatriation happens. And we have a set of large initiatives in the UC system and on our campus led by Native American leadership for teaching and research. And this really fits in that larger frame. This photo I have here recently that occurred this past year was the naming of Krober Hall, a move that again was made towards trying to make campus a place that is safe and welcoming and understands the importance of these types of things for rebuilding and restoring justice to Native American people. So I'll stop there and I look forward to questions a little later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Give Sabrina a round of applause, and I'm going to invite Heather Miller to the, do you want to stand there or sit there?
I'll stand, or I'll sit. Okay. I'll stay right here. I'm good. All right. Kwe amatero, teate, Heather Miller ijatsi, Wyandotte ajatute, atino ne runo ayatute, unditatsi equiati. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our host, Potawatomi, for having us here today. And this week, I've just enjoyed our time here today. My name is Heather Miller. I am Wyandotte Nation citizen. I am Bear Clan, and I currently live in Chicago and Springfield, Illinois, and I am the brand new Director of Tribal Relations and Historic Preservation for the Illinois State Museum. I want to talk a little bit about our history. I want to set the stage with the Illinois State Museum just a little bit in order to talk about our successes and where we're going. Our very limited successes, but our successes. For those of you that are unaware, Illinois is one of those states that currently has no federally recognized tribes that reside in the state. This has created a very interesting situation with our history of the state, but also the way that our museums talk about our ancestors, the way that they talk about our people in general, and the way that they talk about removed tribes. So we don't have strong government-to-government relationships within the state of Illinois. We also have over 7,000 ancestors and over 10,000 AFOs currently in our collections at the Illinois State Museum. And we have some really limited relationships with over 32 tribal nations that we've identified as having connections to the state. So understanding that this is our background, we've got a state that has a very limited understanding of Native history and how our communities relate to that area and how they have been involved in that state. It's created this situation with a lack of understanding around how we need to be in relationship with our ancestors and what that looks like. In 2015 at the Illinois State Museum, we had some changes. We had some things happen on the state level that shut the museum down for a little bit. Leadership change happened, and thankfully, we got a new director at the State Museum. Cinnamon Catlin Letgo joined as the museum director right after 2015. And she brought a new focus around DEAI to the museum. She really decided that one of the things that was missing from Illinois State Museum was a tribal perspective. There was no real connection with a variety of tribal nations. We were not doing a good job in terms of understanding what type of collections we had and how we were building those relationships. And so she wanted to put a reset. She said, let's take a break for a minute. We need to do something different. We need to look at what's going on. We need to rebuild relationships, well, build relationships at this point, and we need to do something different. So it was a big, humongous pause, reset around what was happening at the museum and rethinking how we were going to do this work. One of the big pieces that was critical to this change was introducing tribal authority into leadership decisions. So what I mean by that is that now with this focus on DEI, we understand that in order to manage and to take care of these collections in a responsible way, we need our tribal nations making these decisions and being involved on all levels around what we have in the museum. So one of the first steps was to actually bring me on, to fill this role as the Tribal Relations Director. I'm now involved in the museum. I've been here for about 2 months in this position. So we're seeing how we're starting to make these changes real. We're seeing how these changes are starting to happen and what we're trying to do here. So this is really exciting. I'm happy to be here, but it's also exciting to see that the museum is taking on this approach. I'm one of the 4 members of the leadership team that actually has decision-making power around objects, around things that are in collection. So I'm specifically looking at these relationships that we have with ancestors, that we have with these things that are so important to the people that called Illinois home originally. And so now we've got someone that's looking out and carrying and taking those items into a different perspective, into a tribal perspective, trying to figure out how we build those right relationships, those correct relationships with these pieces. With me as the new Director of Tribal Relations, we've also built up the leadership team on the board level. So Cinnamon has been bringing Native folks onto our board as well. I'm very lucky to be joined in this room by Chris Papan, who's one of the newest members of the Illinois State Board. Yes, because it can't just be me sitting at this table making these decisions. We have to have a variety of Native perspectives and voices that are helping guide and shape the decisions around the collections and what we're going to be doing to take care of those 7,000 ancestors that need so much love and care right now. As we start moving forward with this work, we've also put in a moratorium on our research. Just like we heard from UC Berkeley, we've just implemented that piece. So one of my favorite pieces of work over the last 2 months has been crushing the dreams of multiple researchers who have really wanted to study all of our ancestors. Unfortunately, I really enjoy telling them that they're researchers, and if they can't figure out what else to do with their life's work, then perhaps they shouldn't be researching. We're putting that in place. That's a very big, important piece of that moratorium, and I'm excited that it's now in place. I've also upset several state archaeologists who feel like I am demonizing the state of archaeology, or the state of Illinois archaeology as we now know it. So I'm actually okay with that. I'm cool. So I will continue to do that as well. We're also making changes to many of our mound sites. I am not only the Tribal Relations Director, I am also going to be involved in some of the historical preservation work that is going to go on with the state of Illinois. So I am very excited to begin talking about our Dixon Mounds renovations and work that we're going to do with that particular site. We know that we have made plenty of mistakes in regards to what has been done with mounds in Illinois. We need a lot of work there. I'm just going to say that. We also need to build up a lot better relationships with our tribal nations that have invested interest in those particular sites. So that's where I come in. If you have not reached out to me and you know that you have connections to those sites, I want to be your best friend. This is my job. I need your voice, I need your opinions, I need your ideas to help shape my work and to help guide the work that I'm doing now in this particular position. This is my call out to you, all of you in the audience, to say, if you know that you've got a connection to Illinois, come be my best friend. Let's make this work happen. Dixon's going to turn into a new site where we can interpret anthropology from a Native point of view. Again, we're introducing tribal authority into these decisions and into the way that we reinterpret the history of Illinois and what has been going on in this state. And so when we do that, we need to have our tribal representatives, our tribal folks, helping with that reinterpretation and including their ideas, their opinions, and their histories into these renovations as we redo this site. We need to talk about the fact that, yes, Illinois has absolutely made mistakes, but we're going to move forward with that, and we're going to do this in a right way. And what does that look like? It looks like bringing Native folks to the table and having them involved in all of these conversations as we figure out the right ways to move forward from our mistakes. So we're going to do that. I'm very excited that we're working now with Logan Pappenfort, who is the former second chief of Peoria Nation at Dixon Mounds. He's our interim director, and he's been helping guide that work. He's been leading that work, and he's been a great voice and representative as we move forward to help us guide some of the reinterpretation around Dixon Mounds. Cahokia is next, so I can't talk too much about this. At this point, there's still pieces of the work that we can't reveal at this point, unfortunately. I wish I could share everything that we have planned, but I just can't do that quite yet. But we've got big plans for some of these mound sites that we have in Illinois, and I can see us getting to a point in the future where we're able to have a much larger conversation around how all of these mound sites at one point worked in partnership with one another, and we are able to present a much better, clearer history around our mound sites and what that meant to us as tribal people. That's way in the future, and I look forward to seeing a point when that can actually happen. So as we move forward with this work, and what is the future for Illinois? I'm looking to create a Native advisory group that's going to help guide this work and to help direct me as we move forward. I'm going to be bringing on a NAGPRA advisor that we're going to also house within the Illinois State Museum, and we'll also be bringing on an assistant tribal relations person. So we've got a lot of big changes in the works in the near future. We also understand that right now we're not telling a very good history, a Native history in Illinois. We have currently in our Springfield location a closed exhibit around the Native people of Illinois because it is stereotypical, it's gross, it's not telling good education, it's not doing a nice job of telling our story as Native people. And so we've closed that. We're going to put up a kind of stopgap exhibit as we can, a little bit of an intervention on that until we can come up with a much better, expansive exhibit that does bring in all of our tribal partners and includes their stories. But for now, we're redoing this exhibit. It's going to be called Indigenous Illinois, and it's going to just be a much better representation of what Illinois can be telling folks in terms of our Native history and what that looks like. We are also going to work on those 7,000 ancestors and our 10,000, over 10,000 AFOs that we have. We're going to strengthen our relationships with our tribes, and I like to say that really my job is to get rid of all of our museum collections. I don't want to see them there. I don't want to walk into buildings and know that I have relatives sitting on shelves. I don't want that. So I'm constantly telling people that I'm here to just remove things from the museum. I don't want to keep them. And so that's been a big focus in helping to educate even some of our staff around why that is important. As we work on changing the museum, I'm really interested in bringing new voices of authority, creating and sharing a much better, more inclusive view of Native history of Illinois and what that looks like, a way that creates a better story to talk about important places for all of our Native folks in that state, that shares why we should understand this history and gives a much better perspective of what removal really means and why we don't have any federally recognized tribes in this land that we now know as Illinois. I'm very much looking forward to what the future holds, and I'm very much looking forward to being in partnership with so many of you folks in the room. Tijame, thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather, for all your work. Next, I'm going to bring up on Zoom Mr. Steve Murray, who's the director of Alabama Department of Archives and History. Steve. I'm sorry?
Steve, if you have your slide, are you going to be using that?
Yes, I was going to try to share that in a minute. And if it doesn't work, I can work around it. It's not a problem.
I just wanted you to be aware, Shannon.
Well, thank you, Shannon, and everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I need to make an important point of clarification. When Shannon was making introductions, she mentioned this recent notice of inventory completion for 10,000 ancestors. That was not by my institution. That was a NIC filed by the University of Alabama. I am at the Alabama Department of Archives and History, which is a state agency that was created in 1901. Our institution houses the State Archives, Special Collections Library, and the State History Museum. The lands comprising Alabama, the entirety of which the Department of Archives and History serves, are the traditional homelands of many indigenous groups, including the Alabama, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Coshada, Creek, and Seminole peoples and their ancestors. The ADAH honors Native peoples' deeply rooted histories and ongoing connection to the land, and we remain dedicated to preserving and sharing the experiences of Alabama's first peoples and their descendants. Between 1909 and 1940, the Alabama Anthropological Society conducted excavations throughout central Alabama and donated the materials to our agency. Those transfers constitute the vast majority of our archaeological collections, including 114 sets of ancestral remains, approximately 4,000 associated funerary objects, and approximately 184,000 documented unassociated funerary objects. The human remains were transferred to the University of Alabama in the late 1980s, but the funerary objects remained in the possession of our agency. We conducted minimal NAGPRA work in the early 1990s, but did not pursue consultation. And then in early 2018, tribal inquiries prompted us to reevaluate that earlier work, and we concluded that we were not in compliance with the law. We subsequently invested resources in a compliance and repatriation project that led to our filing an updated NAGPRA summary and a draft NAGPRA inventory in the summer of 2021. Consultation began in the spring of this year and is ongoing, and our first notice of inventory completion is in the queue for publication in the Federal Register. Along the way, during that process, we made some decisions that have helped us to build support among stakeholder communities and maintain progress toward repatriation. Most importantly, as an initial step, we helped our Board of Trustees become informed and dedicated to the principles of repatriation. After determining in the winter of 2018 that we were not in compliance with NAGPRA, we prepared a highly detailed briefing on the history of the collections, NAGPRA, and the purposes of repatriation. We delivered that in writing to our board and through a presentation at a regular meeting of the board in May of 2018, and we recommended that the board adopt a statement of desired outcomes, which it did in fact do at that board meeting. Hope you're able to see that slide now. And this statement of desired outcomes has guided our work since mid-2018 and has been the foundation on which we have built the success that we've had in several areas. And you can see that these include legal compliance with all aspects of NAGPRA, enhanced appreciation for Native peoples' perspectives on repatriation, sustained partnerships with tribes, improved understanding of our agency's collections, enhanced resources for ongoing educational and research use, reputation for transparent, respectful stewardship of Native American materials, and capacity to serve as a resource for other Alabama institutions with obligations under NAGPRA. That statement has guided our work for the last 4.5 years, and although our work is ongoing, we've made significant progress on each of those items. Having the board adopt the expectations set a clear direction for our staff and identified repatriation as a priority for our agency. An example of a specific action informed by the desired outcomes was our decision to reunite ancestral remains and associated funerary objects that had been separated for 35 years. During a cataloging project funded by the National Science Foundation, the ADAH determined in 1986 that the ancestral remains and its holdings could receive better care in the University of Alabama's Human Osteology Laboratory, and the university agreed to receive the remains at that time. After our NAGPRA work was renewed in 2018, our agency determined that our work toward repatriation could be conducted most ethically and most efficiently if we reunited the ancestral remains with the funerary objects that had been removed from the same burials. We sought and received agreement by the University of Alabama, and in August 2021, both institutions participated in the relocation of the remains from Tuscaloosa to our facility in Montgomery. We invited tribal participation in and oversight of the transfer process, and several expressed interest in attending. Unfortunately, one of the COVID-19 surges last summer precipitated travel restrictions for many tribal representatives, but we were grateful that Emmons Spain of the Muskogee Nation was able to participate and guide us in the respectful reunion of these ancestors and their belongings. Another example based on these guiding principles from our leadership is that the ADAH has accepted receipt of small numbers of ancestral remains and funerary objects from two private individuals who just coincidentally presented them to us in the past couple of years. We accepted this material solely for the purpose of facilitating repatriation of the ancestral remains, and they have been added to our existing collections for the purposes of consultation leading to repatriation. And then finally, one of the most important lessons for us, and it's one that I think we understood in 2018 when we started this process, but that the last 4.5 years has underscored and brought understanding in a whole new way for me individually and for us as an institution, and that is the importance of investing in relationships with tribal nations. Tribal input informed our decision earlier this year to remove all funerary objects from display and to develop new graphics that explain to our visitors the basis of those decisions and the importance of repatriation. The decision entailed completely closing one of our permanent exhibitions that relied heavily on unassociated funerary objects. But we are committed to maintaining Native American history and culture as a central aspect of the visitor experience at our museum. So we've begun work to modify our exhibitions, updating them with non-funerary materials and incorporating a broader array of Indigenous voices and communicating the ongoing vibrancy of Native American culture. And to that end, we are forming a tribal partners working group to be part of the interpretive planning process in conjunction with our exhibit design team. And this work is just beginning, but we are excited to have consultation and exhibit design proceeding on parallel tracks with representatives of many of the same federally recognized tribes. Our goal through all these efforts is to create a state history museum where all Alabamians and the descendants of former Alabamians believe their stories are respected and represented. And a firm institutional commitment is necessary to reach those ends, underscoring for us how important it was to set the tone and expectations appropriately and early in our process. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next, we're calling up Jane Pickering. Jane Pickering is the director of the Harvard Peabody Museum. Hi, Jane.
Hi, thanks, Shannon. I'm actually here in the UK, but I would like to begin by acknowledging that the Peabody sits on the traditional lands of the Massachusetts and Cambridge. And Shannon, I know you asked us to think about the future and how we're moving forward and how fulfilling NAGPRA has benefited our institution and other institutional activities, but I do intend to do that. I do want to focus on two areas where change in our policies has had a profound impact on the museum, particularly in regard to new guidelines around research and also how we think about other returns. But before doing that, I did want to take the opportunity to reaffirm a formal apology that I made nearly 2 years ago for the practices that led to the Peabody's large collection of Native American ancestors and their belongings. And these practices ignored the wishes and values of families and communities, causing irreparable harm. And I want to extend that apology specifically today to all members of tribal communities at the conference and online. As Harvard President Larry Bacow said, Harvard placed its academic enterprise above respect for the dead and for human decency. And we know that the Peabody, along with the university, benefited from colonial and imperial policies, including those that were central to the history of scientific racism. So the issue of whether ancestral remains, including Native American ancestors, should be in the collections is clear. They should not be there. And the museum dedicates itself to the ongoing process of addressing this legacy. And I know I'm not supposed to be doing rhetoric, Shannon, so I do want to move on to the practical things here. But the museum, the university has recently released a report on all ancestral remains in Harvard's museums and declares that repatriation goes to the heart of the ethics, values, and morality of an institution, and that our history demands action, and it's taken too long. And the report does bear witness to the 6,500 Native American ancestors that remain at the university and urge the acceleration of our NAGPRA implementation. And this recommendation has already become a priority. We did not wait for the report. And the museum is making a major, I want to let people know that we are making a major new investment in NAGPRA. And we have a project plan that I'll tell you, although I did hear that the new draft regulations were published today. So of course, our plans will be amended as those regulations are, finalized and implemented. But we are in the middle of hiring 4 new full-time positions, 100% dedicated to NAGPRA, and also increasing the number of staff in other museum departments who will be supporting NAGPRA and other repatriations. And we hope in 3 years to expedite the new policies at the museum, some of which I'll mention later, but aiming to complete the requirements for Federal Register notices for the vast majority of Native American ancestors and their burial belongings. And of course, we know that that aim will of course need to respect and honor tribal consultation timelines, but the museum plans to proactively contact tribal nations across the country. And so while this particular project is just beginning, as I said, we've not been waiting, but we've been thinking about NAGPRA policies with a sense of urgency and a commitment to do better. And so in the remaining time I have, I want to focus on two areas that are particularly important: research and returns. So as President Bacow has stated, we at the university, at the Peabody, often have privileged academic activities over the rights of Indigenous peoples. And a year ago, the museum announced a new policy that requires permission from authorized tribal representatives for all research on ancestors or burial belongings covered by NAGPRA. And this policy was informed by conversations we were having with tribal nations. And it aims to encourage knowledge generation in a manner that's founded on respect for and in partnership with descendant communities, in line with our broader commitment to ethical stewardship of all the collections in our care. And we want to encourage scholars to respect tribal concerns and their guidance regarding their research. The urgency to address this matter also led the museum to reflect on research across the collections, and we now have a new university-wide review committee to evaluate research requests on all ancestral remains of individuals from outside the United States, and have intensified our attention to our database records, which, as I'm sure many here know, there are large amounts of problematic language found in collections data. We want to prioritize Indigenous terminology and language, and we inform and wish to inform database users in a very transparent and upfront manner that they will find distressing and offensive content in our database. We're also working actively with several tribal nations around access to online information and images. So for example, we were just having discussions last week that are guiding our plans around implementation of new Native American archival materials, protocols for those. And that was following a repatriation that happened, but we're now working with a group of nations on implementing those restrictions. So we've had ongoing work on security protocols for the database, and we do restrict records, but I think, so they're accessible to only to staff and tribal members, but there's a renewed urgency and resolve to this task. Finally, I want to touch on the issue of returning cultural items. And so with the formation, we had a number of changes over the last 2 or 3 years. And in the summer of 2020, we had established, or rather the Dean established a new NAGPRA advisory committee for the museum, and immediately moved to address an action that had caused deep pain to tribal nations, which was our decision not to return associated burial belongings with the return of ancestors under 10.11. And I know many of you know and were hurt by that decision. And the committee was very clear about the moral context of the return of a human being to a tribal nation means that those items placed in a burial should be transferred along with the person or persons with whom they were buried. We had made the wrong decision and we needed to change our approach. So we requested administrative steps within the university to enable these and other transfers, which was granted in January 2021. And we contacted tribes who had requested burial belongings in the past and were declined. And we've worked with those nations to publish federal notices to return all these items, the last of which was published in September. So as part of this work, the museum began to think more broadly about the return of cultural items outside NAGPRA. And one example is the return this past summer of Chief Standing Bear's pipe tomahawk to the Ponca tribe of Nebraska and the Ponca tribe of Indians of Oklahoma. In May 2021, the museum was contacted by an individual about this pipe tomahawk, which has a unique and important history. As many of you know, Standing Bear was involved in a landmark lawsuit in 1879 against the federal government that led to the decision reaffirming the basic human dignity of Native Americans and their equal protection under the law. And this was the pipe tomahawk that Standing Bear gave to his attorney, John Webster, in thanks for representing him. So in response to this inquiry, the chairman of our NAGPRA advisory committee, Phil Deloria, and myself talked with the chairman of the two Ponca tribes. And we all agreed that the association of this pipe tomahawk with this pivotal moment imbued it with a shared cultural meaning and legacy such that it really belonged with the Ponca people. And so the pipe tomahawk was deaccessioned, and then on June 3rd, this past summer, because there were many COVID-related delays, a delegation from both Ponca tribes visited the museum for its ceremonial return. It marked increased efforts of the museum to return tribal artifacts to recognize the rightful and moral claims of sovereign nations. And this effort has resulted in the university creating guidelines to support the return of cultural items from Harvard museums, which are available on the university website. So I've worked, unlike many in museums for more than 30 years, and I have seen their power to improve societal well-being, especially around education. And I've watched museums enable truly transformative action within communities. But I've also know that we too often fall short of our ideals, and in particular, our reluctance to confront the sometimes devastating impact of our institution continues to cause pain to the Indigenous communities today, and how that is the case. So, I do believe there's cause for optimism for museums to do better. And at the ceremony for the transfer of the pipe tomahawk, I felt so thankful and privileged to be there and to be part of this incredible moment. And I want to quote from the press release that the Ponca of Nebraska put out. And Stacy Larrabee, I don't know if she may be at the meeting, I'm not sure, the TIPO for the Ponca tribe of Nebraska, and also a descendant of Standing Bear. And she spoke about the impact of the repatriation, saying, we talk about generational trauma, but we don't talk about generational healing. And that's what we're doing now. This is healing. And I hope and am optimistic that museums, including the Peabody, can become part of that healing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Next is here in person in Michigan, Mr. Ben Secunda. He is the NAGPRA project specialist at the University of Michigan.
Thank you. Just cutting right to the chase. When I started at U of M in 2010, I told folks that I had spoken to a lot of elders, repatriation specialists, spiritual leaders, and they were telling me in very plain language what could, I was asking, what do we do? How do you want this done? And this is a direct quote from one of them, as they said, people have to get back on the ground. They have to return to the earth. And so they said, however you can do that, and however you can expedite that process, you have our support. Just do it. So I went back to U of M. I told them, you put your heads down and you start making transfers. That's what you do. Everything else will take care of itself. They will see the sincerity by your actions. So start making transfers. So U of M, we did put some policies and procedures in place. I'll highlight a couple of those that helped facilitate that process and expedite the process. One of which was they did set up an advisory committee, and the advisory committee put policies and procedures in place. Part of that process was actually the result of a phone call with Sherry Hutt, the former director of the National NAGPRA office, and we called about something unrelated, and she ended up talking to us for about an hour and just walked us through, as she saw it, this is the process from solicitation of consultation to the transfer of possession. And out of that, I just generated basically a step-by-step process of what she said. And I've even shared that with other places that we've worked with. I tell people there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. Let's, get ancestors home and get them back in the earth. So, for example, we work with the state of Michigan. They have some ancestors at University of Michigan. Here is the process, and we'll do the work for you, but you have to make the decisions, and this is how you get through it. So that, has assisted some other institutions, some other places that have contacted us. And our policies and procedures too. What was important for the University of Michigan was that the decisions are made out of the Vice President for Research's office. That's where federal compliance is. It should also, they felt, be at the institutional level because it should cover all collection holding units, not just in the one case, the Museum of Anthropological Archaeology. It should be across campus. It should be across branch campuses. And that final decision, the regents put it with the Vice President for Research. The Vice President empaneled the advisory committee to make the policies and procedures, but also to have representation of various members of the faculty that are across disciplines, and also have tribal representation and appointment, voting members. And that member right now is William Johnson, who's the chair of the Michigan Anishinaabe Cultural Preservation Repatriation Alliance, NAGPRA for short. And he's also the Saginaw Chippewa NAGPRA designee. Willie is wonderful to work with. And the policies came out of that. A couple of important policies. We have it available online. You can see it for yourself. But I know a couple of things that really helped expedite the process was having funerary objects returned with what were deemed culturally unidentified sites. Tribes, when they go to a lot of other institutions, sometimes it gets into a question, at least it was at the time we made the policies of, well, it has to be, the funerary objects have to be returned for affiliated, but not for unaffiliated. U of M felt, no, there should be a consistent policy, and it should go across the board. And so there shouldn't be this choice. And I know with the tribal representatives we spoke with, they were saying, dispositions are faster. We work together, and so that process is just a lot cleaner for us, and we appreciate Michigan, doing this and doing the right thing and moving things along, because we don't need the university's sort of stamp of approval about who our ancestors are. We know. And so just cut to the chase and let's get people back on the earth. That works for us. Another thing that was important is, there is a process going on here, and so sometimes that takes some time to resolve. Moratorium, once a claimant request comes in, the moratorium gets put in place. There are restrictions on all NAGPRA collections, but it's an absolute moratorium when a claimant request comes in. And that was done as really a good faith gesture, because I know there are suspicions that I heard of from tribes about, people dragging their feet, basically. And so there's no foot dragging at U of M. Like I said, sometimes there's a sequence, and we have that worked out with the tribes and stuff, that what we're working through, but we don't want any access or any kind of suspicions that we're trying to slip in research or something like that before ancestors go home. That's not the case. So that moratorium was a good faith gesture, and it was very important. In addition to that, one of the things that the advisory committee is important for is my office sees and deals with a lot of conflicts of interest. And what they saw in the regulations was kind of funny, is that you had the museum and the tribes supposed to be coming in consulting as equals, but the museum makes the final decision. And they're looking at it and they said, how is that not a conflict of interest? And so they said, well, we're going to hope this works out amicably and everyone, cooperates and we get the result. But the committee is there to also step in if there are any questions and concerns, and they can advise the Vice President for Research and evaluate, talk to the people involved, and make a recommendation, and the Vice President will act accordingly after that. Fortunately, that has been very minimal. Things have been very amicable to date, so that's good. Another thing I'm going to say that's been helpful, and I'm going to show here for NAGPRA. NAGPRA is a wonderful organization, and I would encourage tribes, if you can form a consortia and expedite the process, that is a wonderful way of doing it, because the more tribes, basically I advocated to set up the policies in such a way to let the tribes resolve things among themselves. That's what I was advocating for, because I said, you know, with NAGPRA as sort of the example, there's communication, cooperation, coordination, pre-planning. Everyone talks to one another, and so the institution is really just cast in the role of being a facilitator at that point. You're there to effect the transfer. Everything else is the tribe's business. There is power in that for the tribes. And the more, you know, there's that coordination and planning and pre-planning among the tribes themselves, there's less decisions that devolve to the university, to the institution. And so it is awkward being in those moments where you're trying to facilitate, and sometimes there's some discussions and everything, and you're trying to navigate some of that. And so it's like I told the university, the more we can stay out of that, the better. And I really do think that NAGPRA is a wonderful example and a model for doing that kind of work together on the tribal side of things and keeping that power among the tribal communities before they come into the university. Really smooths out the process. In fact, with the the remaining Michigan sites that we have, because we have a sweeping request in from for all the sites in the state of Michigan, which are about 75% of the ancestors at the University of Michigan. It's about 1,500 out of a little over 2,000 total. We have all of the remaining sites that we have to do. We know who the transfer recipients are. We're in communication with them. We're in coordination with them. And so they know, and when we talk to NAGPRA, and even non-NAGPRA members who are involved in these transfers with us, who are Aboriginal to the state of Michigan, we keep them apprised, and they can kind of chart step by step how we're going through this. And so they know where we're at, and they know where we're going. So that is helpful. Final thing that has been useful for us and has been actually helpful to the university, ceremonial preparations, consultations, transfers. One of the big things that came out of this, and it caused a lot of consternation early on, was smudging. Having a smudging policy, trying to get a smudging space. And what was funny is that there were different ceremonies like this that when we started talking about things, I was trying to tell people, as I said, tribes do this all the time. They work in, you know, they know how to smudge indoors. They know how to deal with smoke alarms. You know, some of these things that are just, you know, I was getting questions about even, well, they can't smudge in the hospital. I mean, what if there's oxygen? And I was like, I was talking with some tribal leaders, and they said, oh, we have techniques for doing that. No one wants to blow up, you know, and so it's just, don't talk to us like we're stupid, you know, and so that was the thing, is it has been very helpful in having these discussions, because what came out of this was, first of all, the fire marshal normally has a fee for deactivating the smoke alarms, and he said, oh, this is for NAGPRA? I'm not going to charge the fee. That's too important for the university. Great. And since then, too, we've had fire marshals come out and see a smudging ceremony, and now we have a campus-wide, university-wide smudging policy. You can smudge anywhere on campus now. And so, you know, that's been a benefit to the university in general. In addition to that, we know this is a heavy process, especially at the time of the transfers and the consultations. It can be overwhelming, so having space available, a private room, people can smudge themselves, they can just decompress and talk. And so, you know, having those spaces available for people to just, you know, collect themselves and reflect and just sort of recharge and rejuvenate is good. We also try to prepare in advance. I know with the tribes in state, one of the things they requested was wrapping ancestors in red non-synthetic cloth. That's one of the preparations they do. University of Michigan provides that cloth. We make that preparation as part of the process. Anything else we can do to help the transfer process, we do as well. We've even had requests of, can you bring the ancestors to us? But there have been requests saying, could you not fly? Could you drive? I personally have driven as far as North Dakota before to return an ancestor. So any reasonable request we get, we try to honor. And so, and we've never had one we couldn't honor to this date. So that's good news. And just as an overall progress number, we're, as I mentioned, the Michigan sites comprise about 3/4 of the overall holdings. So about 1,500 ancestors. We're right under 900 returned so far. So just within the last year, we've crested the peak. We're on the downward side now, so we're on the drawdown. And in fact, I know I've been working with Willie Johnson as a transfer recipient. We have just over half of the remaining ancestors are in one large site, and we're making plans to make that transfer. So there's going to be a big number jump. A little over 450 ancestors are going to go in one move because in terms of sites, we're about 3/4 of the way through the state of Michigan. So we're making the process, we're doing the work, and sometimes we cut corners a little fine as we try to expedite. We don't mean any offense. We apologize for that. Like I said, we're spoiled by working with NAGPRA sometimes when we're talking to out-of-state tribes and that, but you know, it'll always be a work in progress, but it's good to have that rapport and work together. And you know, that's the best advice I can give, is just do the work and make the transfers.
Thank you so much, Ben. I just am forewarning everyone, this panel will not end at 4:30, okay? Thank you for your patience. Our next speaker is up on Zoom, Judith Stoddart. She's the Associate Provost for University Arts and Collections at Michigan State University.
Thanks very much, Shannon. I want to start by acknowledging that Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe. Sorry, I'm having some screen problems here. Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. I'm not going to read the rest of our land acknowledgement, but rather the statement that Indigenous leaders on campus formulated along with our land acknowledgement that indicates the responsibility that comes along with it. And it reads, "We respect the desire to recognize the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary stewards of the land. However, we ask that when offering a land acknowledgement, remember that these acknowledgements must be preceded by relationships with living Indigenous people, communities, and nations. This declaration must then be followed with ongoing commitments to these same communities." I read the short form of the land acknowledgement today with this very much in mind and as a theme for my remarks. In 2019, when the Provost's office refocused attention on NAGPRA and moved it to the institutional level and out of a museum or department, MSU had an outstanding joint disposition request dating from 2011 from NAGPRA, and you've just heard about NAGPRA, for ancestors removed from multiple Michigan counties. There were many layers of problems that have resulted in the institution being at a standstill. There were also a number of ancestors who had been brought to the forensic anthropology lab through a variety of processes, including from private landowners or police, who had not been included in any inventories. In the spirit of what Shannon asked, which is focusing on solutions and commitments for the future, I won't go into a diagnosis of what happened to land us at this place. But I also don't want to do that because what I observed when I first became involved on behalf of the Provost's office was an internal argument over who was at fault for the impasse, with a lot of internal finger pointing and also stalling on moving forward because there were disagreements about the problem and because there was so much to do. So moving towards solutions involved stepping outside the internal quagmire to reframe this as an issue of institutional accountability. Everyone is responsible for where the institution is in meeting their commitments under NAGPRA, no matter when they arrived at the institution, where they sit, or whether they're even aware of NAGPRA. It is an institutional responsibility to educate its own community, to center NAGPRA in institutional work, and to hold itself accountable both for complying with NAGPRA and for approaching it as fundamentally about human rights and dignity and respect for tribal sovereignty. Saying I wasn't involved in these actions that got us where we are, or I wasn't here when, is not a path to a solution, even though it might be a comfortable one. This is not just a museum or collections issue or one that resides with specific individuals responsible for doing the work involved in moving to repatriation. If the work is meaningful, it means examining practices that might on the surface seem removed from NAGPRA, but that directly impact the way that an institution carries out its responsibilities under NAGPRA. That was part of moving compliance out of the museum to a shared responsibility between the Provost's office and the President's office. I am not, as Shannon said in the beginning of the session, I am not a museum person. I am actually outside of our museums, although I oversee them. So as an institution, what did that mean for us? We worked toward building what I'm going to call a path to accountability. And I'm going to focus on 4 key steps. First, listening to and respecting tribal accounts of their interactions and experience with our institution and its failures. Early in doing a restart here in 2019, we hosted NAGPRA leadership at MSU for 2 days to have conversations that were intense, difficult, honest, but also at many moments warm and congenial. That meeting was the beginning of monthly meetings that are now virtual that still continue. NAGPRA members have been generous in sharing their time and their knowledge to help us build paths forward. Monthly meetings have also ensured that MSU is held externally accountable for what we commit to do on an ongoing basis. In the spirit of NAGPRA, it is a consultative approach to accountability. Second, writing an institutional NAGPRA policy in a way that models our approach to NAGPRA. And this is the administrator in me. I think policy writing is a huge opportunity for education, community building, and stakeholder buy-in. Our policy emerged through committee. The way the committee did the work was deliberately undertaken, although I don't know if the committee members were aware of it, to model the consultative process. We had a member from NAGPRA from the beginning, and we were so fortunate that our first representative was Colleen Medicine. And I don't even want to start because I will start to tear up. Colleen is an amazing, amazing person. We constituted the committee to include people in the institution who sat in areas that did but also did not see themselves as stakeholders in NAGPRA work. We had diverse Indigenous faculty from our institution, directors of MSU's Native American Institute, American Indian and Indigenous Studies, and the Forensic Anthropology Lab, representatives from departments where faculty had certain perspectives about their research, to leaders in the libraries and university outreach and engagement. A few people indicated at the beginning that they were happy to serve, but they weren't sure they had much to do with compliance or collections, and several had not even heard of NAGPRA. The result was to broaden awareness, but more critically, for people to think about what an institutional commitment might mean in their part of the institution. It meant they could bring pieces of the policy as the group wrote them to folks who might not ever have seen them otherwise, and to come back with new questions about how their own practice might be changed by how we approach this work. We were also able to include case examples from ongoing repatriations and consultations that brought to light issues we would never have thought about. The process was iterative and additive. NAGPRA members beyond the representative on the committee also weighed in and influenced the policy while we talked in our monthly meetings about issues that emerged. The result is a policy that has a lot of buy-in and was widely circulated before it was even passed. The process took almost 2 years, and that was a good thing in this case. Third, writing into our policies a required and regular process of information sharing, cross-checks, timelines, and several levels of accountability at multiple stages in the process, both from within and outside the institution. The point is not to increase the bureaucracy or slow the process. In fact, it speeds up the process and ensures that we can't have one person or one area of the institution creating an impasse. It is a means of infusing accountability throughout the institution where we can. And fourth, recentering the approach to NAGPRA. NAGPRA work is, but really is not, about us as institutions. And that is where I would push back a bit against the title of this panel, A View from the Top. NAGPRA is first and foremost about tribes and tribal sovereignty. One of the things that I learned early, in part because of the generosity of NAGPRA members to allow us to be present during some private moments as they reconnected with ancestors from whom they had been separated, is the commitment of time, resources, personal knowledge, and emotional labor by those who do this work on behalf of their tribes. I cannot imagine what it is like on top of that to have to encounter resistance, legal issues, and bureaucratic barriers while doing it. It is our responsibility as institutions to facilitate that work in any way we can, and to continue to learn and decenter ourselves as we do so. Two early things that were asked from us to start to show our commitment to work as facilitators and collaborators One was to institute, as Ben was just talking about, a university-wide moratorium on anything that might be NAGPRA eligible. And we have done that pre-consultation, not post. So if we think something might be NAGPRA eligible, it immediately has a moratorium. And second, to move ancestors and cultural objects from the many places they had been held at our institution, and to find for them a separate space that was centered in what tribes needed for their work, a place that is secure, private, easily accessible, has easy parking, and follows care plans that are created in consultation and signed off on by all parties. I want to recognize the work that was required for that on their part. NAGPRA representatives were involved in the move, in making sure that the ancestors were prepared for repatriation according to their own traditions. In short, again, doing very heavy emotional and physical labor. Entering this from a mindset that is about the needs of tribes as they recover their kin and their heritage shifts the way we think about accountability. We're not just accountable to legalities, we are accountable to people whose heritage and ancestors have been taken away. We have transferred legal control in all of those stuck cases from 2011, transferred physical control in all but one, as well as completed repatriations in many cases that were not even on our radar in 2019. One of the positive outcomes that we have seen recently, beyond the completion of repatriations, both in cases where there had been an impasse and in cases that were not included in the institution's initial notices, is the identification of new NAGPRA eligible items or sensitive collections at MSU. Some of this has resulted from consultations and queries external to MSU, but some has resulted from individuals or units within MSU starting to ask questions because they have participated in the conversations about the policy. The questions less often start with, this doesn't technically fall under NAGPRA, but they are more often along the lines of, is this something we should consult about to see what tribal nations think? Following our policies, we start from the perspective of repatriation and how we can best accomplish it, not how many barriers we can introduce to make it challenging. People are seeing accountability broadly and communally rather than narrowly and individually. New areas of the university are becoming more aware. For example, questions are being asked by and conversations are ongoing with university communications teams and campus planners. If our institutional commitment is genuine, repatriation should always be ongoing, not done. The NAGPRA Advisory Committee is currently working on collections guidelines and policies that will be consonant with what we say we hold ourselves to in doing repatriation. But what I think have been a more contentious proposal in the past, that we have an institutional approach to collections rather than unit-based ones that is centered in the rights of Indigenous communities, is now something we are working actively toward. This process will include an even larger group of stakeholders and will be one additional step toward reframing and recentering our institutional accountability. It works in concert with faculty and staff who are re-examining what it means to be a land-grant university like Michigan State. Shannon started by saying we were freed from obstacles. I doubt we will ever get to that place, but I hope that we as an institution are no longer the primary obstacle. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Judith. And our last but not least presenter on Zoom is Mr. Dr. Ryan Wheeler, Director of Robert S. Peabody Institute.
Thank you, Shannon. I want to thank Shannon and Colleen and AAIA for inviting me to participate today. I'm sorry that I'm not there in person. And thank you all for sticking around and listening as well. I'm kind of an informal person, and so I don't really have like prepared remarks or anything. I made some notes about things that we do here that I think have helped. And they often echo what other folks here have said, so I don't think that they're necessarily, you know, new or surprising, though I may share a few things that could be a little surprising. So hopefully my concluding, as kind of the concluding speaker, maybe I can shake things up a little bit. You know, I think as we heard just now from Judith, listening to tribal representatives is really important. And I have to acknowledge that I learned a lot from both Seminole and Miccosukee friends when I worked in Florida. I was the state archaeologist there for a while before moving to Massachusetts. And here in the Northeast, I've learned a lot from members of the Wabanaki Repatriation Committee, especially people like Don Augustine, Roger Paul, Niana Neptune, as well as Ramona Peters, who was for a long time the leader of the Wampanoag Repatriation Committee. And, you know, those folks, especially the folks from Maine, the Wabanaki, you know, helped me realize that our institution, the Robert S. Peabody Institute here at Phillips Academy, still had a lot of work to do on NAGPRA, that we weren't done or anything maybe even close to being done. And so I'm grateful for that. Several years ago, we developed a policy, and it's probably sort of an odd policy in that it's really only about a page and a half long. So it's not a big, thick manual. But we looked at the places in the law and in the rule where there were, I don't want to say gaps, but they were sort of interstices, where there were places where there were, where maybe it was a little unclear, or where there was a decision that could be made in following what had to happen. And we tried to address the way that we would approach those particular instances instead of sort of rewriting, you know, kind of the rule or the law over and over again. And you know, one of the key elements, and I think Ben spoke to this already, was this recognition that there is a significant imbalance in NAGPRA. Sometimes you'll hear people say, you know, that the goal of the law, the work that was done in the 1980s before NAGPRA passed, was to create a balance, and that's not true. As Ben said, you know, the decision-making power rests with the museums and the institutions and the agencies. And so what we put in our policy was that all of the places where there were opportunities to find in favor of the tribes, we would do that. You know, I think one of the things that we've been doing more and more of is relying on the expert opinion of those tribal representatives in terms of understanding who should be involved, what objects are funerary objects. And so that's been important. One of the things that I haven't really heard maybe anybody talk about too much, maybe Steve hit on it a bit, was the idea of collaborating with other institutions. An issue that we have is what we call shared and split collections. Maybe that's not the best term, but it conveys pretty quickly what the situation is. And, you know, this is something that I certainly took from my time in Florida. Historically, it was something that people here at our institution did, was we were always willing to accept transfers from other institutions in order to help repatriation happen. We've gone to other institutions and helped them develop inventories. We've pursued people to try to get them to make transfers, you know, have also just been sort of a sounding board or a place to maybe get some advice on you know, somebody's particular instance or issue or case where we might be able to kind of help talk through things a little bit. And so I think that's really something that's helpful because, you know, it's, you know, the history of museums is basically not only the taking of ancestors and objects, but then sort of redistributing them as gifts or exchanges, loans. And so kind of retracking and re-understanding what those relationships are has been really important. One of the things that I haven't heard anybody talk about is this idea of NAGPRA, non-NAGPRA. Well, a little bit, maybe people have talked about it. And, this is kind of a concept that our curator of collections, Marla Taylor, who's there in person, hello, Marla, came up with, or, we talked through this, and it's this recognition that institutions tend to look at their collections as these are the individuals, the items that are subject to NAGPRA, and then these are the individuals and items that aren't. And the reality is that it's impossible to really make those decisions without consultation, tribal input, collections reviews. And so, we have crafted our collections policy to recognize that, that there really is no way for us as non-Indigenous museum personnel to make those decisions about NAGPRA, non-NAGPRA. Those have to be made, about the entire collection with input from Indigenous communities. It's interesting, we've heard about people and moratoriums on research. We actually haven't done that, but what we have done is we revised our collections policy to require consultation with culturally and geographically affiliated tribes if somebody wants to access parts of the collection. So that ensures that we're not allowing research to occur, and that could be photography, simple access, more invasive investigations, without really exploring and understanding, are we, what are we allowing people access to here? What else could I share? Those are some of the main things. I mean, also I think being proactive, not waiting to hear from tribes, but actively seeking out tribes where we think we may be able to affiliate individuals that previously had been determined as culturally unidentifiable. We've had a lot of success with that. And let's see. I think, a few of the other things that just from our NAGPRA policy are, making sure that the tribal representatives are meeting with and consulting with the people here that make decisions. So there aren't, there aren't people in some other office somewhere on campus or committees. And I know many people have committees, and I'm not trying to sort of poo-poo that, but I think it's really important that the people that are invested in the decisions are all at the table. And so that happens here. And I think that that's something that's made it a lot easier to make those, decisions and get to a place where we're publishing notices and repatriating. So that's a few things. And as I said before, we're always interested in collaborating with people. So if you do want to talk, Marla's there at the conference, and you're always welcome to contact me as well. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, you've heard from our 7 directors and important positions in museums that have been, not so good at compliance and have either starting to change their ways or have changed their ways. I want to go to the Zoom questions first, the Zoom chat, to see if there's any questions for our panel members.
Yes, ma'am. At first, I just want to let you guys know I will get all of you pinned as soon as I get the question out, okay? So we have one that says, I hear all the people at the top apologizing and talking about their new policies. What are you doing about training your staff? These are the people we are dealing with. We had a horrible experience with Berkeley, treated as if we were taking their belongings. As I am happy to hear about the new policies and changes, I truly hope it is trickling down to your staff. We are preparing to consult with Peabody in 2023. I hope to see your words and policy in action. And this is signed off Kathleen Marshall, NAGPRA rep for Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians, Santa Ynez, California. Thank you.
Thanks. Sabrina, could you address that question? We'll just, I don't think we'll have time for all 7 of you to address each question. So Sabrina, could you respond? And can you put her up?
Yeah. Yes, I appreciate the question from Kathleen, and I appreciate her bringing it up here with us at the panel. You know, the policies and the process, a big part of it is the on-the-ground practices that happen in these institutions. And I hope that that treatment that Kathleen notices was prior to our new policy and practices. I acknowledge that I know there was a great deal of painful and dehumanizing treatment to Native peoples by our campus. This is why a lot of folks like me are involved, because we want to try to overcome that. If it's something that's new, I hope that Kathleen can let us know, or let Wendy know, who she's given the question with. Wendy, who was at the Fowler, is a great collaborator for us and has helped us in reforming our practices on the Berkeley campus. Our aim is to try to take feedback now when we also are involved in repatriations. We make sure we talk to groups afterwards to make sure what we did right or not right. If they've been very generous in helping us, the feedback so far from our repatriations the past 2 years has been very positive. It doesn't mean we don't have to continue to learn. So I think we need to have all of the staff that are involved in working with tribal communities to be culturally sensitive and to continue to work on that as a work in progress, join communities of practice, and to get better ideas about this. But I'm sure other folks also here have some more ideas.
Thanks, Sabrina. That didn't sound like a full plan like our question, the woman who answered the question was hoping for. Does anyone on our panel want to share about anything specific about training staff on NAGPRA? I'm hearing complete silence, which means to me
well,
that...
I was
Thanks, Jen,
just
go ahead.
So yeah, I think we're probably all trying to be polite and not talk over each other, because I saw Steve was unmuting as I was doing so too. I think that's a really good point. I think most NAGPRA staff that I know, which obviously is all the people at Peabody, but other staff at other institutions, I think everyone is trying to do the right thing. I think that sometimes if you're a staff member, if you're not feeling that you're trying to balance knowing what the senior admin is, certainly in a bigger institution like a university, I think sometimes it's hard for staff because then sort of seeing what's going on at a higher level. And so that may have influenced things in the past. And so, yeah, we at the Peabody have really been thinking broadly, because I noticed actually just there was another question coming up in the chat about outside NAGPRA, but thinking about ethical stewardship more broadly. And so NAGPRA being a piece of that, and really having sort of conversations amongst the staff. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about are actually coming from the staff who may not have always felt empowered to speak out. But yes, so I would say that's really an important point, and we are very much have a sort of program to think about sort of ethical stewardship, of which NAGPRA is a part. We've also been trying across the museum, and that includes NAGPRA, to really enable staff in different departments to learn about what's going on in other places, or you know, so that people can learn about and learn from each other in terms of, you know, if our curatorial staff are working with communities, how can there be some discussion between that and maybe the NAGPRA staff with their different areas of expertise? Bit vague, sorry, but anyway, that's where we are at the Peabody.
Steve, were you about to respond?
Thanks. I just wanted to share an observation that the influence can move in the other direction. And it's really no coincidence that our organization started making progress on NAGPRA as we were completing a generational shift in our staff. And so in our case, this is very much a staff-led reckoning and process of education of program managers and administrators, including me. And then we took that to our board. And so it's, I think it seems to me what I see happening in agencies with which we are familiar is that very often that's where leadership is coming from. And that's something I think to be celebrated. It doesn't solve the problem recognized by the person who posed the question, but I just wanted to point out that that's at least true in our institution.
I would just, you know, I'd add to this. I mean, at our institution, we're small. Marla and I do the consultation and NAGPRA work, but you know, it's the person asking the question is actually getting to a broader issue, which is of training archaeologists and museum personnel in general. And this is kind of to the people at universities. People aren't learning these kinds of practices at those institutions for the most part, just like people aren't learning how to do CRM archaeology. And this is like one of my soapbox issues. But I mean, you know, academic institutions train people to be academics, unfortunately. And we also need people who know how to do NAGPRA work, or to work in museums, or to you know, work for the government or companies in a sensitive, compassionate way. And so those are things that universities need to teach people.
Thank you. Next question on Zoom.
When a facility, this is Randy. So when a facility, museum, university has ancestors and the tribe doesn't repatriate or doesn't claim those ancestors, and they are culturally affiliated to that tribe, what is done with them? If those ancestors are not claimed, are they used for testing and research?
Anyone like to take that question?
I guess I will, because we actually have a number of instances where we have done the NAGPRA process, gotten to the point where we've published notices and are ready to repatriate. And for whatever reason, the affiliated tribes have not been able to come. We've developed care and trust agreements that specify some of the ways that we will continue to house and care for those individuals and their belongings. You know, and it's an opportunity for the tribes to let us know if there are other ways that we need to, you know, behave and in terms of housing or care. And in some cases, it's because they're working on bigger repatriation projects. There are, you know, individuals at countless number of institutions across the country. In other cases, they just don't have a good, safe place for reburial or may lack capacity. I mean, it doesn't, you know, I mean, basically when, you know, the affiliation decision is made, those people really are, well, I mean, they never belonged to us, but I mean, they really don't belong to us anymore, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And so they wouldn't sort of be like, well, it's sort of a free-for-all now that you could use in teaching or testing or research or anything like that. But I mean, you know, some people have been with us for a long time, and sometimes we've kind of gotten more involved than maybe we would have been or should have been, and trying to sort of, you know, see if there's something we can do to support the repatriation. Sometimes we can't, but sometimes, you know, there's some work that needs to be done with another institution, helping to find a reburial place. So those are the kinds of things that, you know, one, you know, could do. And even that could take a long time or a lot of work. And I mean, I suspect nobody else would say, yes, sure, teaching or, you know, research.
Thanks, Ryan. Are there any questions here in person? Don't hesitate to come up to the microphone. We have Melanie O'Brien coming up to the microphone next. Flip it. Thank you.
Just a minute. Hello. I'm not sure if they can see me, but
They will shortly.
okay. It's Melanie. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my question for all of you is, if you could raise your hands. Well, now they switched the camera, but if you could, if you could raise your hands if you've published a notice within the last 6 months, your institution.
Can you bring the institutions back up so we can see everybody? There we go. So say the question again.
If you've published a notice in the last 6 months, to raise your hand. I think, Steve, your hand's a little off camera, but it's up there. Thanks. You know, I think that for me anyway, and this is not just me personally, but for the process of NAGPRA, the publication of a notice is what allows repatriation to occur. And of these institutions, I know that you're all working very hard on consultation, but until you get to that notice, repatriation can't happen. Those ancestors can't go home. And so I would really challenge each of you to think critically about your statistics in terms of how many ancestors are in notices. And I know that's maybe not a metric that all of you are focused on, but at your levels, I think that's the metric you should be focused on. It's less about your staff or the number of consultations that occur, however important those are. It's about getting those ancestors into notices so that claims can be made and they can be repatriated.
Would any of our institutions like to respond to that?
I will. So that is actually one of the metrics that we keep. I was just pulling up our metrics. We have metrics that we track of things that are actively under consultation, ones that are actively in the process of drafting a notices. So we actually keep our counts according to how many have actually are either close to being in a notice or in the process of publishing a notice or have published a notice. And as we do our institutional accounting, that's what we use as a metric of progress.
I think we're both strategic and opportunistic. And so, you know, we're constantly looking for, you know, partners to work with on repatriation and consultation and repatriation. And we're prepared to kind of pivot. I hate that word, but sorry, I guess that's maybe appropriate. Turn to face where, you know, where there is a path. And, you know, sometimes that might be for one individual. And sometimes it might be for 10. I guess one of our challenges is there's, you know, we have probably just fewer than 100 individuals that are still with us. And so we don't have a lot of big, you know, collections of, you know, 100 people here or there. You know, they're smaller, you know, groups of people. And so, they still takes a lot of time, you know, to consult on one person, or 10. But yeah, it's a good thing to keep an eye on and think about. Some of it is, you know, where tribes are and who has capacity, and you know, there's a lot of factors, I suppose. But I think being proactive and actively looking rather than waiting for people to come and call you or knock on the door is the right way to go.
I thank you for your question, Melanie. That question is really important, and if you didn't hear Melanie's question, I invite you to consider it and think about it again, because what Melanie is asking or presenting is that the notice means the completion of all the consultation and all the work. And what many of us have seen in our experience is institutions who will continually discuss and consult and delay and find excuses of why more consultation is required and delay. And so they're having ongoing discussions and consultations about potential repatriation or potential affiliation, but then never get to those final notices. And so that is why Melanie came forward and asked about whether that is a metric. I think that's the most important metric that a director at a museum could be looking at. Thank you, Melanie, for that question. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Roshan Downs. I'm from the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe, and I currently work at the University of Nevada, Reno. When I looked at this breakout session, I was instantly ready to fight, because I visited both the Harvard and the Berkeley collection. I visited my ancestors under the pool of Berkeley. And so my question is, you know, as I listen to the changes, which, you know, it's a lot better, but I want to know, Berkeley, or I know both Harvard and Berkeley have very large collections. So as I looked at the Berkeley collection, for instance, there's 9,000 remains. And as I just heard, you know, 15, it takes a long time. So what is the plan to get those 9,000 home, or those larger collections? I mean, making policies and expediting is great, but what's your matrix on returning those 10,000? Because just when I was looking on the inventory yesterday for Churchill County, there are 291, and those are my ancestors. So I know there's a lot more here. So I guess what's your track?
Yeah, I can speak to that first. Our track and our plan is to, we are engaged in consultation with the majority of the tribes that are affiliated with those 9,000. And we're really using, you know, closely working with Melanie O'Brien to try to get the notices up, to be able to repatriate those majority that are culturally unaffiliated at the moment still, and that are from federally unrecognized tribes. And so I think we're in a position where we, as I said, I think that the timing of the majority of those 9,000 ancestors are from the Ohlone people. And it's our attention that if we can make transfer of control happen, that's probably going to happen first, because we're going to have to work with the tribe in order to be able to find places to take them home. And so I think that the move is going to have to happen, and that we are going to have a transfer of control happen much more quickly than we will have transfer of possession.
I'm a Nevada tribe, so
yes.
How are you dealing with the Great Basin tribes?
We are hoping to continue to consult with you and have our tribal liaison and repatriation coordinator reach out to you and be able to repatriate them with you. We're ready to go. We hope that we can talk with you.
There's a question at our Zoom.
Oh, did you want me to respond, since Harvard was mentioned as well?
Yes, please.
Yeah, just to say, and I completely agree, Melanie, and we, to answer the specific questions too, we have, I think more than 500 ancestors either about to be published in federal notices or very soon, possibly more. So we are very much focused on that metric as part of, you know, just obviously a much sort of ongoing and other important parts of it, but very much focused on that metric. And as I was saying, although I know, you know, that there are new regulations about to come out, but our current plan under the current regulations is to move to federal notice for the vast majority of ancestors at Harvard in the next 3 years, which is the main goal of this new project and acceleration that we're working on. So look forward. I not obviously know all the details of all the ancestors at Harvard, but if we will be working with you and reaching out to you if we have ancestors, your ancestors.
So this next one is coming from Shannon Martin, but for those of you in the panel who are following the comments, you'll notice this question is iterated over and over and over again. Why can't institutions place a moratorium on accepting private donations of ancestors and NAGPRA eligible collections? Instead, direct these donors to the tribes.
We have a moratorium at Berkeley. We don't accept any ancestors for sacred belongings.
That's true for us at Harvard. And in fact, just last week, our curator and I were on a call with people who had reached out to us and to put them in touch with a tribal museum for a donation.
I mean, I agree that it would be better if people made those transfers directly to a tribe or tribal museum. We don't have a moratorium, and we do accept transfers from other institutions, and I think we've accepted some collections as well where we recognize there may be NAGPRA. I don't know if well, in some cases there were individuals, at least so in the course of the last 10 years. And I think, you know, it's better than somebody throwing them in the garbage. That's sort of the bottom line, because that's what's going to happen potentially. They're going to wind up at a flea market, on eBay, at an auction, or literally in the trash. And so I think that, you know, it's sort of easy to create a moratorium so that you can't accept those collections, and understand that they come with an obligation. But, you know, I think that is our obligation as museum people to get them and to make sure that they can then go on that that pathway to being returned. You know, I know when people have, you know, tried to sort of do the right thing and maybe return remains to tribes, you know, without perhaps being in contact, that's created problems. And so, you know, when I worked in Florida, our state laws allowed us to accept those kinds of transfers from anybody. And, you know, we've got that in our policy here as well, and do it pretty regularly, I guess, which isn't to say that it wouldn't be better if somebody didn't, you know, go directly to the tribe, but acknowledging that might not happen, you know. And so I'd rather us take the people and those items and sort it out than have something else happen. Maybe not a great answer. Well, I understand what people are saying, that you know, it's not a desire to accumulate. Trust me, that's not our intention, and maybe that's not what every institution should do, but that's what we do, and we'll continue to do it.
And I think it depends on the location, but I feel like we're morally obligated to help donors or people or public that have items to find the appropriate places for these items to go home. Certainly ancestors, but even sacred belongings. I had an email this week of someone in the state of California that had a sacred object from 100 years ago that I will work to try to connect them with the appropriate indigenous archaeologists, museum directors, tribal museum directors in order to get these sacred objects to the right place.
We have accepted collections twice in the last couple of years, and for reasons similar to what Ryan expressed. It was clear to us in interacting with these individuals that, and people have feelings for an array of reasons. There could be embarrassment that they have these materials, that they've been in their attic for 50 years, hesitancy and concern about that possession being known. And we just feel that it's part of within our responsibility as stewards and as an institution who is going through the process ourselves to try to facilitate repatriation when we can. That doesn't mean that we would necessarily take on projects from any other institution in the state, but we have accepted transfer of remains from another state agency where we had materials from the same site, funerary objects from the same site in our holdings. But I think for us, we look at it as a state institution having some responsibility as someone who's developed the capacity to do this work, that we try to do it as opposed to telling that individual that here's an array of 18 federally recognized tribes who may have an interest in those materials. And that is an intimidating prospect for an individual who has no knowledge of this process to go out and start making contacts with federally recognized tribes, most of which are out of state.
Our policy explicitly forbids accepting or requiring collections with human remains or associated funerary objects that are purposely separated from human remains, from ancestral remains for the purpose of donation.
Yeah, U of M has a similar policy with no ancestors as a default position. And in fact, again, I'm going to talk about NAGPRA here. Working with NAGPRA, we will tell people, there's your, all the in-state tribes, we tend to get, if we get contacts, they tend to be from people in-state. That's the place to go, is go to NAGPRA. All the right representatives are there. They have to be NAGPRA designees to be members of NAGPRA, and that's the place you need to go because all the tribes are represented there.
I'll say that I have zero interest in getting any more ancestors into our collections. I don't think that that's an appropriate thing for us to do. However, if we are the institution that has the ability to make sure that they get to the right place, then I'm happy to be that intermediary. But at this point, it would just be the intermediary. I think that us as a museum absolutely need to first recognize tribal perspective and make sure that that voices the first ultimate place that we seek advice and guidance on that issue.
Thank you all. I want to just check. We have one question on the floor. I'm sure we have dozens of questions in the chat. Yes, no? We're good?
We have a question or two, but these guys, yeah.
Okay. And just to remind you, our folks are here to close us out, and I know we're running quite a bit over. So thank you for your patience. Let's go ahead and take a question from the floor. Over here, did you flip it? Just start talking, see what happens. Not yet. Flip it again. Keep talking. Okay, you need to flip it up, make sure it's flipped up. Okay, flip it up. Okay. Somebody get her. Thank you.
Does this work? Ooh. That would happen to me. I'm Melanie. I am the collections manager and assistant NAGPRA coordinator at the Arizona State University. And I have one comment and a question. So the comment is we actually are piloting a NAGPRA track at the Arizona State University to train NAGPRA coordinators. So we heard that need and we're attempting to fill it. My question is, from people at the top, how would you suggest staff and tribal members impact that change when those directly at the top now are not willing to change?
Good question. Sabrina, you're not mute. You're muted. Yeah.
Sorry, so that's a big question, how to get the top to change when they're unwilling to change. I think at Berkeley, that was our problem. And it didn't change until we had a legislation that forced the campus to change. I think I won't lie and say I don't know if my campus would be here if there wasn't a state legislation. But I think the most important thing is having Native American voices at the top. And if you don't change it from that level of the top, it's not going to change. So it sounds simple. I know it's very hard to do, though. It takes decades, and it takes a lot of dedication of time of Native American students and faculty in the case of an academic institution like Arizona State or my institution. And these are hours that are unpaid. It's time. It's a job that's difficult. It's difficult for everyone, but to ask Native people to also do this job of having to have these painful reminders of the hurt and harm is very difficult. But I think until they have voices at the top, there is no change. So.
Thank you. Next question.
Bonjour, Jaya Ginwa. My name is Lakota Hobai. I am a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I serve as the TIPO and one of the NAGPRA designees for the Machipinnashiwish Band of Potawatomi Indians. And so my question is for Jane. I think there are still a lot of concerns that many of us have with the Peabody Museum. We know there have been some efforts put forward in terms of reuniting funerary objects with ancestors previously repatriated. But I want to speak specifically about the recent report that was released. I think there's a lot of breakdowns in communications still occurring between tribes and the Peabody Museum. I'm also an alumni of Columbia University and a past participant of the All Ivy Native Council and Conference. And so I was not made aware of that report until I had heard of other alumni from Harvard putting out the letter to the president regarding concerns with that report. In particular, the letter calls for the university to correct and account for its transgressions to each group in a proper manner. I can speak to at least experiences directly with MSU and how they've handled that. I started my position as MSU was reinitiating those conversations and really having to address those issues. It was not easy by any means, but they had people there doing that work and having those conversations and actually listening to us. Additionally, there was a failure in the report to clearly and unequivocally state that there would be no destructive analysis to the ancestors within the Peabody Museums and Harvard's any and all collecting institutions under the Harvard umbrella. And so I think that would be my final question to you. I believe you had mentioned a policy, but I didn't hear the words moratorium, stoppage. Can you speak to, are there efforts, is there discussions occurring that there will no longer be research on our ancestors, on the funerary objects that Harvard dragged their feet on repatriating, and still are needing to do this work? Miigwech.
Sure, I can, so I don't know how familiar people are with the report that I assume you're referencing, which is the recent one from the Harvard President Steering Committee. That's the one you mean, I assume? I'm going to assume you're saying yes. So that report was actually about ancestral remains from across the world. And so we do have a policy that was in place before that report was it's been in place for more than a year. And we do not allow research of any type on ancestors or funerary belongings or anything we think will, even if it's not under active consultation, is ancestors or items that would be under NAGPRA without authorized tribal permission. So we refer researchers or other scholars who are interested in doing research to the authorized tribal representatives. And unless we hear an affirmative, because we know there are areas of research that some tribal nations are interested in, or they're already working with a researcher, they have a strong relationship with a particular scholar, but without that affirmative consent, then there is no research on ancestors. So, and then what we've done, what the report recommended for ancestral remains outside of the US is a similar review. It's a little more complicated when you're thinking internationally about community representation and who can speak for a community, but that's something that we're working on as well. So does that answer your question? But certainly for ancestors and funerary belongings here in the States, there is, without affirmative tribal permission, there's no research.
That's great to hear, Jane. That's great to hear, Jane. I just want to bring your attention to conflicting statements that are in the press that state that Harvard will not do testing on any culturally affiliated ancestors. And then how the policy is written on the website seems to leave a little bit open to interpretation of what the moratorium actually applies to. And so I've heard from some of the other institutions, and maybe you can add to it, the other folks, about what your moratorium says, because there is a big difference when you say all Native American ancestors versus this class or this class.
Yes, I agree. Well, first I would say that sometimes the press is not reporting things accurately. So that was the first thing. So the place to go is our website. And it is on the website. We have a NAGPRA section and there's details of the policy there. And it is on all ancestors and funerary belongings. So, that is the current policy and has been the policy for the last year. Yeah. But sometimes that new policy is not necessarily reported in the press, so that may cause confusion. I agree.
Okay, Shelley, you had another
We
question.
have a kind of a follow-up. We just want to be really clear here. Are you talking that the indigenous ancestors from North America are the ones, and then other people's ancestors are you know, suss as, you know, or, because that wasn't very clear and we just need a little.
Yeah, sorry. So the report was about all ancestral remains from across the world. So at the Peabody and also at the Warren Anatomical Museum, which is in the Harvard Medical School. And so in terms of, so I think I hopefully was clear about for US and NAGPRA outside that we have a new university. So speaking to, I know others have spoken about how it gets taken out of the individual museums and into the main university. We'll be reviewing those research requests for individuals' ancestral remains from outside the US. And that will be reviewed by a small committee that is not a group of scientists, but includes an ethicist and native representation. And then we're going to be seeing how that happens, but being really aware of it. And as I said, one of the complications outside the US is it's not always clear who can speak for the community, but we ask all researchers now to give us an indication of their relationships with communities and what they do to partner with communities as part of their scholarship. So.
Thank you for that clarification. I think from representing the comments here, just the iteration,
Yes,
I think coming in privately as well is the expression that any human remains are human remains, and
Correct.
that it's bad juju to mess with them.
Yeah, I think one of the things we really think about, and I would say, I mean, there is sometimes misinformation in the press, and so if anyone has any queries, and I know that Shannon plans to put up, you know, names and addresses and contacts of it for us all, but I would say, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But we are aware that Indigenous communities around the world have many different views, and so we want to respect that as well. But as I say, so we're sort of thinking and learning, and as we talk with communities, we learn more. So, yeah.
Thank you. One more question from the floor, and then we're going to call it a day.
Is it on this? Okay, yay. First, I just want to apologize to everybody sitting here. I realize we've gone well over time, and apologize especially to our color guard who is sitting here waiting to close this out. But I have to follow up on a question, and so I'm sorry. My question is going to take us back to two previous questions regarding moratoriums, and I have to share with you that the lens that I'm coming from is one in which I was taught by my community long ago that we do not support any form of extractive DNA research on our ancestors, nor do we support any intrusive research. And I think I'm sitting here and I heard from some of you, either you have full moratoriums, or you have moratoriums after a claim is made, or you have other policy and procedure that includes some sort of moratorium, and some of you don't have anything. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking to myself, what would possibly be the reason that an institution wouldn't put a moratorium if they sincerely had the mindset of being completely transparent and compliant? And I heard from some of you in other answers about moratoriums, but I can't help but think it's because the institution itself benefits from research. And so I guess my question is half a statement, but also a question of like, why wouldn't you do that good faith effort? Why wouldn't an institution, if you're the directors, the people at the top, what are the issues? What's the problem? Why isn't your institution doing this? That's what I would like to know. Thank you.
So the simple statement of saying all human remains will not be tested without consent. Are there any responses? Heather?
Yeah, We can absolutely say that. I'll absolutely say that. I have zero interest in having any research done on any of our ancestors. It's simple as that. Why would we do that? I'm not asking anybody else to go dig up their cemeteries and start doing tests or looking at their ancestors. And so when I answer these emails, when I answer these requests for research, when I answer any question about, can I take a picture of this? Can I see this? Can I do this? No, you can't. If you want to do that, then you're going to give me permission to go do it for your ancestors too. I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to ask for your permission, because that's just, no, we're not going to do that. So the answer is no. It's just no. That's the stopgap now. It's no. So for us at the Illinois State Museum, what I'm really finding is that we're good on that at the top. The top is pretty committed to that right now. It's actually the trickling down of those decisions where it's getting tough, where we're having to do the education. So when we ask the question about staff in the institution, that's where we're having the problems. That's where we have to do the training. That's where we have to do the education piece, because that's where we're stumbling. Those are where the questions are coming up. So we're finding that even though we're doing all this DEAI training and informing people, there are still issues within the institution that we need to address. It's that lack of education. It's that lack of knowledge around Native communities, and just simply having Natives pushed out of the state has created this lack of knowledge. So we need to start changing all of that. We need to help educate our staff around those issues and make sure that they understand those pieces. So that way when they do start working more with, when we start working more with tribal nations, when they see more tribal people coming through our doors, they understand why that process is there. And so we're not creating those boundary or those issues when we are beginning to work in better relationship with our Native community and make sure that they're coming into our doors in a good way. So really it's with the staff that we need to start doing that work. Then it's going to be educating the public, because our public also doesn't understand these issues. And so when we make these changes on the top, what I'm noticing is that we actually have to do all the work downstream to make sure that those changes, to make sure that our leadership decisions are being respected, because otherwise that's where we're going to run into the problems, and that's where we're going to be undermined from the top. So we've got that education piece next. That's a huge part of what we're going to do moving forward, and some of the big changes that I'm really interested and excited to see us implement on that level in our institution. Tijame.
Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to respond? Sabrina.
I'd like to say a quick comment. I appreciate the question. I think that it is a good faith effort. You know, Berkeley had done such egregious practices of research and teaching with human ancestors for so long that it was a good faith effort to say, we hear you, we understand, we're stopping everything. And I think that research and teaching with the ancestors is, as Shannon would always say, is the floor. So we have a moratorium on all Native American sacred objects, archaeological. They don't have to be from the funerary context, you know, the objects of cultural patrimony, as well as the ancestors. But I also hear, like Steve's example about, you know, if you have 11 tribes, how will you decide if you have a donor that says, I have this thing, and you say, here, go talk to these other 11 or 15 tribes, what will happen to that ancestor object? So I would maybe ask, if that was a situation where you really are concerned about something being lost or destroyed or thrown in the garbage, why not ask the tribes? How would you like us to handle it? Would you like us to take this? We have a moratorium, but we could take this temporarily and accession it or keep it for you until we can help you. Rather than it be kind of the opposite, that there is no moratorium, maybe have the moratorium and have it case by case basis.
I'll add as a follow-up, I appreciate that suggestion by Sabrina. And just to provide a little context, when these materials came to us, we had developed a defined schedule for consultation and repatriation for all of the ancestral remains in our collections, which consultation began in the spring, and we have a 12-month schedule. And so we have NICs scheduled for submittal for publication about every 2 months through next spring. And so there was a window of opportunity for us to bring those materials in and put them into a body of materials ready for consultation and proceeding forward that way. I think today we're better equipped to ask those questions with the tribes now that we're actively in consultation, but certainly respect the concern about moratoria. And I just want to further clarify that the deed of gift signed by the donors under those situations specified that this was being accepted specifically and only for the purposes of facilitating repatriation under NAGPRA processes. We have also had a complete moratorium on research of all ancestral remains and all funerary objects. It's been in place since 2019.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I think we heard Jane confirm that their moratorium is on all native bodies, will not be researched or extractively taken apart for research, and we're very happy to hear that. I want us all to give, this has been a difficult session, and I think it's a good discussion. You've met some of the heads of institutions who have been on that top 10 list of ancestors, numbers of ancestors that have not been repatriated. And so I hope you maybe heard some promises that we can hold their feet to the fire for, and learn more about them and their institutions and what they want to bring to the table. And please hold them accountable. Let's hold one another accountable and support each other. And as we move forward, I want to thank all of our panelists who agreed to join us today. Let's give them a round of applause. Give yourselves a round of applause. Everyone on Zoom, a round of applause. Thank you all for your patience. And I want to tell everyone before we close out, those of you who have attended in person, you will be receiving a survey in about 2 weeks, and you'll also be receiving a link where you can access the recordings that have been happening on Zoom, so you can go back, you can listen. If there was something you missed, you can review. So know that that's coming along with a lot of other information. And we will keep you on track with the NAGPRA new proposed rule and all international repatriation efforts, among other things. Thank you all. Is there any, today's survey, there is one survey left for you to fill out or use your QR code to fill out. And on Zoom, you go to the last session and you'll see the link to the survey. We really need that information. It helps us better plan for next year. And tell us what you like, what you didn't like, what you need to see more of. Thank you all for your time. I want to thank Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians and the Four Winds Casino and all the wonderful AV and food staff and everyone else. And with that, I'm going to shut up because Frank's coming up here to throw me off. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Colleen and Cece and Anhe out in Zoomville.
Shannon, don't go away. I wanted to, as the president of the board of the Association on American Indian Affairs, the first thing I want to do is congratulate and thank all of our staff. Can the staff members stand here? One's up here taking a picture. She's already standing. Yes, we appreciate your hard work. On behalf of the board of directors and our council of advisors, we really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be part of this event. If we could have the flag carrier stand by, and we're getting ready to retire the colors, and we're getting this conference. When we leave from here, we're taking a lot of. There've been a lot of, say, some troubling words. There've been a lot of calming words. There's been a lot of strength, There's been some tears, some laughter. All of these things are part of us, and we take that with us as we go home. Because what we're taking from here is we're taking something to our home offices, we're taking things to our homes with our families and our communities. And what we take out of here, hopefully, will strengthen all of Indian country and all of our partners as we work on these issues that are so important to our cultures, both to all of our cultures, not just the native cultures, but to the world cultures. We learn how to respect and work with each other and work on these important issues. And so we hope that you will be able to take these things with you as you go on your way. We hope safe travel for everybody, and that we have some good words here. I know we have Clarence, I believe, is getting ready to sing a song here pretty soon, and we've got other things to close out with, so we could start with our closing ceremony now. Yes, let's have that mic turned on. There we go. There we go.
Wow, it's been a long 3 days, but I hope everybody learned something. At times it gets mind-boggling, especially dealing with the heads of the institutions, you know. And I just wonder, you know, I says, is this stuff going to be done before the zombie apocalypse? I hope so, because I don't want to be around when that happens. But I'd like to talk to Colleen after we get done doing this closing ceremony. It's been an honor here for me and Clarence to be here doing the sunrise ceremony. I love this man, and as I told the people who attended our ceremonies, he was supposed to have a procedure done on Tuesday, a pacemaker put in, but he wanted to be here instead because he thought it was very important to be here, and so he's here. And he put his operation off for his procedure done, and it won't be done until November 1st. I love this guy. He's a good man, knows the traditions. And I appreciate Kevin Doherty being here, being our Osko Baywish, to help us out, to help push Clarence around in the wheelchair, because if I had to do it, I would have ran somebody over for sure. I'm legally blind. And Andy Jackson, who left early today because she had to go back to work. I love her like a sister. She always helps me and Clarence out when we do these things. But I think we all learned a lot here today, the past 3 days. And I know sometimes it got frustrating. And sometimes I got frustrated too, you know, but I guess that's the way life is. And sometimes we got to take the good with the bad. And so we got to continue to move and try not to look back, but look to the future of our people. I'm talking about all Native people on Turtle Island, as well in South America too, all around, all the indigenous people. Because they are in the same boat as we are, trying to get our ancestors back. And it's a hard, hard road. This song I'm about to sing, I deemed it to be appropriate because of what it means. Especially for this conference here when we're talking about these sacred things about our ancestors. My mother, when she came and found this song, she told me, Clarence, she says, this is a very sacred honor song. And I use this song when I do my funerals with Clarence. At the time when we go to the cemetery to put that man or woman or that little child into Mother Earth. And I sing this song. Because you got to understand that we travel not only in this physical world, but we also travel in that spiritual world when we leave the physical world. We go on a journey on the path of souls to get to the land of souls. I am just talking about the Three Fires people here. I know other nations have different stories. But here with us, this is how we do our thing. And we honor those ones who have gone before us to that western door. And I think about that eagle staff that the Pokagons have over there. It's a community staff. And on that staff, there's feathers from families who lost veterans, either in war, who passed away under other circumstances. And so it's a good thing that that flag's here because it represents a lot of things. But what this song represents, it's telling us here, and it's telling the spirits in the other physical world, or the spiritual world, as I love to call it, because that's what it is, and the people in the physical world. I have traveled a long way, so later on I can go dancing. Because we believe in our way of life. When they go on that path of souls, and they cross over that river, and they get into the land of souls, there's going to be a big feast there for them. And there's going to be dancing going on. And that's what it means. I have traveled a long way, so later on I can go dancing. Not only in this physical world that they travel, our ancestors, but also in the spirit world, because they are still looking to get home. Because we believe that when we take things from them and we dig them up, that their journey on the path of souls has stopped. And they can't get to the land of souls. And so right now they're around here floating. That's so when I blew the eagle whistle this morning and Wednesday and Tuesday, I called them to come in to be here. And I bet you they were up here just looking down upon us, just shaking their heads. Oh my God, am I ever going to get home? And so we have to make a promise, and I don't know when that promise is going to be fulfilled. I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime. And maybe not. But we have them up there waiting to go home. And so that's what this song is going to represent. I'm going to start out and go 2 times through the song I sang on Tuesday. And then I'm going to stop and go to that sacred song. For the ones who are on Zoom, I don't mind you listening to this, but please don't tape this stuff. I don't want to see it on any DVD any place, because to me this is a sacred song. It's for our ancestors. Now, after I get done, we'll put 2 times through, and then I'll bang the drum 4 more times. Then we lift the flag up, and then when I start singing, start moving.
Oh, Miigwech, Clarence, and for our flag carriers, can we have a round of applause for everybody? And thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn this back to Shannon if she's got a last word here.
He knew that somehow. Surveys, CC has a box. CC's box there will hold the surveys when you get done with him. Thank you. Please stay in contact with us, and if you're interested in hosting the repatriation conference next year, let us know. We'll see you soon.